By the end of October 1942, the northern sector of El Alamein had become a test of endurance as much as a test of tactics. The Australians had pushed toward the coast road, fought through the fig orchard, captured and defended Trig 29, and held the exposed pocket around the saucer and the blockhouse. These were not glamorous armored sweeps across open desert, but hard infantry battles fought among mines, railway embankments, shallow ridges, strongpoints, and shell-torn tracks. The significance of this phase lies in its timing. Montgomery's main breakthrough had not yet come, but the northern pressure had to continue because every hour it held Rommel's attention made the coming blow more likely to succeed.
If you would like to move beyond the podcast, you can see my available books at militaryauthor.me. And at trackpads.com, you will find magazines and galleries with hundreds of thousands of photos and videos to explore.
The phrase, "hold on one more day," captures the character of this stage better than any map arrow can. Units that had already attacked were asked to defend ground they had barely had time to understand. Units that had been mauled were relieved by others moving through darkness into positions they had not seen in daylight. Engineers, stretcher bearers, artillery observers, anti-tank crews, and infantry all worked inside a battlefield that offered no clean pause between attack and defense. In a mechanized battle, holding ground can sound passive, but at El Alamein it was active work. It meant keeping routes open, bringing forward ammunition, dragging guns into position, reorganizing exhausted companies, and preparing for counterattacks before the dust had settled from the last one. The northern sector mattered because it threatened the Axis connection to the coast road and railway, the practical lifelines behind Rommel's front. If those routes were compromised, the German and Italian troops holding the coastal positions could be isolated or forced into a dangerous withdrawal. That possibility meant Rommel could not ignore the Australians, even while pressure elsewhere grew. Montgomery understood that pressure in the north did not have to produce the final rupture by itself. Its purpose was to fix enemy attention, draw in reserves, and consume Axis fuel, ammunition, and strength. The men fighting around the saucer may not have seen themselves as part of a grand deception or operational design, but their survival helped shape where the enemy could move. For the Australian battalions, the cost of maintaining that pressure was severe. Formations such as the 224th and 248th battalions had been pushed through repeated attacks, counterattacks, and holding actions until their fighting strength was badly reduced. Men were tired in the deep physical sense that comes from poor sleep, little water, hard digging, constant shell fire, and the shock of losing leaders and friends. A battalion can keep its name long after its companies have been thinned and its platoons mixed by battle. Commanders had to judge not only whether a position was tactically important, but whether the men in it could still hold if another armored counterattack came at first light. Relief in the dark became one of the most dangerous operations of the northern fight. Fresher units, including battalions brought forward to replace exhausted ones, had to move through lanes, tracks, and gaps that were still under fire and still not entirely safe from mines. They had to find the correct positions, identify neighboring units, learn where the enemy was, and dig in before daylight revealed them. The units being relieved had to withdraw without leaving gaps or abandoning weapons and wounded men. None of this was simple administration. A failed relief could undo days of sacrifice by creating confusion at the very moment the enemy attacked. At El Alamein, a night relief could be as important as a dawn assault. The defense depended on combined arms at close range. Infantry holding forward ground needed anti-tank guns near enough to stop German armor before it overran them. British tanks could provide support, but they too were constrained by mines, embankments, shell holes, and the danger of anti-tank fire. Artillery behind the line had to respond quickly to reports from observers, who were often under fire and unsure exactly what they could see through dust and smoke. Engineers had to keep crossings and lanes usable, because a position without supply or evacuation would soon become untenable. The battlefield looked small to the men inside it, but every small position depended on a large system behind it. Axis counterattacks remained dangerous because the German and Italian defense had not yet lost its discipline. Rommel's forces were short of fuel and under growing pressure, but they still had experienced troops, concealed guns, and enough armor to punish exposed infantry. A counterattack did not need to annihilate the Australians to succeed. It could succeed by forcing them off key ground, reopening a route, or convincing Montgomery that the northern pressure had become too expensive to continue. German tanks and infantry pushed against the Australian lodgements, while artillery and mortars tried to make holding them unbearable. Italian troops in the wider sector also fought and suffered under the weight of the offensive, and their presence formed part of the defensive web the Australians had to break. Inside the forward positions, logistics became personal. Ammunition had to be carried to men who could not hold without it. Water had to reach troops whose bodies were being drained by desert heat, dust, and fear. Wounded men had to be brought back through the same routes by which reinforcements moved forward. A shell that destroyed a vehicle might not only kill its crew, it might also block a lane, delay a gun, or stop stretcher parties from moving. Recovery work, medical work, and traffic control all became forms of combat because they determined whether a forward position remained alive. The front line was not a single neat edge. It was a network of men and machines trying not to fall apart. Command decisions in this phase required a grim kind of steadiness. Major General Leslie Morshead, commanding the 9th Australian Division, had to maintain pressure while recognizing that his forward battalions were being worn down. Montgomery, looking across the whole battle, had to keep the northern sector active while preparing a renewed breakthrough effort elsewhere. Neither problem could be solved by a single dramatic order. The issue was balance. Attack enough to threaten the enemy, hold enough to preserve the gains, relieve enough to keep units functional, and avoid using up the very strength needed for the next phase. The commanders were not merely asking men to be brave. They were trying to turn endurance into operational effect.
The armored dimension of this holding battle is easy to miss because the most dramatic movements had not yet begun. Tanks were present, but they often fought in support of infantry rather than in broad maneuvers. Anti-tank guns shaped the battlefield by threatening any armored vehicle that tried to move carelessly through narrow approaches. Minefields and embankments reduced speed, while artillery and infantry determined whether a position could survive long enough for armor to matter. This is one of Alamein's most important lessons for understanding tank warfare. Armored breakthrough depends on conditions created by people who may never ride in a tank. The infantry holding the saucer and the engineers keeping routes open were part of the armored battle, even when the action around them looked like infantry survival. By holding one more day, the Australians helped create the time and misdirection Montgomery needed. Rommel had to keep worrying about the coastal flank because the threat there was real. He had to commit attention and strength to ground that seemed capable of unhinging his line. Meanwhile, the 8th Army was preparing to concentrate a new blow farther south than the fiercest northern fighting. This was not trickery detached from sacrifice. It was a hard operational truth. One part of an army may have to endure the enemy's focus, so another part can strike where the enemy is less ready. The northern sector did not merely accompany the breakthrough plan. It helped make the breakthrough plan possible.
The soldiers holding the line could not know exactly how close the battle was to changing. To them, El Alamein was still mines, shell fire, thirst, exhaustion, and the next counterattack forming in dust. Yet their endurance had strategic meaning because the Axis army was being forced to spend strength faster than it could replace it. The Northern positions held long enough for Montgomery to prepare the next move, and that fact turns the episode from a local Australian ordeal into a key stage in the history of armored warfare. Tanks would soon be asked to break through, but first the enemy had to be fixed, drained, and distracted. Holding ground was not secondary to movement. It was the condition that allowed movement to begin.
You've been listening to Famous Tank Battles. These battles were never just about machines. They were about doctrine, terrain, firepower, logistics, and the hard problem of turning shock into victory. For more military history writing and books, visit militaryauthor.me. And for magazines, podcasts, and a massive archive of military photos and video, visit trackpads.com. Thanks for listening.